The moment he lifted that terrified baby Bigfoot out from under the fallen cedar tree, Raymond Cole knew his life was no longer his own. The creature's trembling hands clung to his jacket, its enormous eyes filled with a fear that felt painfully human. He thought the danger would come from the injury, but it came from something far worse. By nightfall, the forest changed. The trees stopped moving, the wind died, and from somewhere deep in the dark timber, a sound rolled across the valley, a low, thunderous call that didn't belong to any animal he had ever heard. They were hunting. Not the baby he had rescued, but the man who dared to take it. Raymond didn't know it yet, but every step he took to save that small creature was leading him toward a face-to-face encounter with its entire tribe, and what happened next defied everything he thought he knew about the wilderness. Raymond Cole had spent most of his life fixing engines no one else could fix and keeping to himself, tucked away in a weathered cabin deep in the Pacific Northwest. Dawn usually meant quiet coffee, the creak of pine branches, maybe an elk moving through the brush. But that morning, he heard something that didn't belong in any forest he knew. A cry, thin, trembling, almost like a child, but not quite. Raymond followed the sound through the mist-soaked pines, pushing aside ferns heavy with dew until he reached a fallen cedar, its massive trunk split in the night storm. The crying was coming from beneath it. When he knelt down, his breath caught in his chest. A small creature 4 feet tall, covered in wet, patchy brown-black fur, was pinned under a heavy branch. Its chest rose in shallow, desperate breaths. Its wide, glossy eyes locked onto his, full of terror and unmistakable pain. For a moment, Raymond froze. He remembered the stories his father told him when he was a boy, stories of massive, silent figures roaming these woods. Stories he'd filed away as campfire nonsense. But the creature's whimpers weren't nonsense. They were real. Raymond braced his boots, grabbed the branch, and heaved with everything he had. The wood rolled just enough for the creature to drag itself free. It collapsed forward then, to his shock, reached up and clung to his jacket like a frightened child seeking comfort. Raymond stood there in the cold morning air, heart hammering, realizing he had just crossed a line he could never step back from. Raymond eased the small creature into his arms, feeling its trembling body press weakly against his chest. Its fur was soaked with rain and streaked with blood from a deep gash along its leg. Every few seconds, it let out a soft, quivering cry, high-pitched, painful, almost pleading. The sound cut straight through him. He looked around the forest, suddenly aware of how quiet it had become. Too quiet. No birds, no wind, not even the usual rustle of small animals. It was the kind of silence that meant one thing in these woods: a predator was close. And if this was a baby Bigfoot, its mother would be something far beyond any predator he'd ever dealt with. Raymond's instincts screamed at him to walk away, to leave the creature where he found it, and get as far from these trees as possible. Every story he'd ever heard said the same thing: never get between a mother and her young. But as he stood there wrestling with fear and logic, the little creature's grip loosened. Its head dropped against his shoulder. Its breathing went thin and ragged. It wasn't going to make it on its own. Raymond cursed under his breath, tightening his hold. "All right, kid. All right. I've got you." With one last glance at the darkened tree line, he turned and started the long, tense walk back to his remote cabin, knowing full well he might not be returning alone. Raymond pushed open the cabin door with his shoulder, keeping the small creature cradled against him. The warmth from the wood stove hit them both, as he stepped inside. He laid the baby on an old wool blanket near the hearth, its breaths still shaky and shallow. Up close, the wound on its leg looked worse, skin torn, muscles exposed, the fur matted dark with dried blood. He grabbed his first aid kit from a shelf and knelt beside it. "Easy now," he murmured, unsure if it understood, but hoping the tone mattered. To his surprise, the creature went still. Its wide eyes followed every move of his hands, not with fear, but with awareness. When he winced at the depth of the cut, the creature mimicked the sound softly, almost as if responding in sympathy. When he dabbed disinfectant on the wound, it let out a low, vibrating hum, not quite a growl, not quite a whimper, more like a language trying to form itself. Raymond wrapped the leg tightly. "There you go. That should hold." As the rain began tapping against the roof, the little creature reached out with its long fingers, brushing his wrist gently. Not a reflex, not instinct. It was gratitude. Raymond leaned back, shaken by how human it felt. When he tried to step away to clean up, the creature let out a panicked chirp and tried to pull itself upright, reaching for him. It wouldn't settle until he sat beside it again, one hand resting lightly on its shoulder. Eventually, its breathing slowed, the tension leaving its body as sleep finally took hold. The cabin grew quiet until, far off in the dripping forests, a deep, echoing roar rolled through the night. Raymond froze. The baby stirred in its sleep, and answered with a faint, trembling call of its own. Raymond stepped out into the cold morning air, the forest still soaked from last night's rain. The first thing he noticed was the silence, thick, heavy, unnatural. Then he saw the tracks. Huge, dinner plate-sized footprints pressed deep into the mud around the cabin, circling it in wide, deliberate loops. Some prints were fresh, edges sharp. Others overlapped, showing more than one creature had been there, maybe several. Raymond's stomach tightened. He followed the prints a few steps into the tree line and stopped dead. The nearest cedar had 3 long, jagged slashes carved into its bark, each one higher than his head. Another tree showed 2 parallel marks, clean and powerful, like something with hands the size of shovels had raked across it. These weren't the marks of a wandering animal. They were signs, warnings, messages left for anyone who understood the language of the woods. Raymond suddenly felt exposed. The tribe was close, too close, and they knew exactly where their missing young had gone. When he returned inside, the baby was no longer asleep. It sat upright, wide-eyed, its body tense. It let out a soft, uneasy rumble and glanced repeatedly toward the door, as if listening to something he couldn't hear. Raymond knelt beside it. "You sense them, don't you?" The creature pressed itself against him, trembling. The tribe was coming, and they were getting closer by the hour. The next 2 days passed slowly, the forest outside holding its breath. Inside the cabin, the small creature began to regain its strength. Raymond watched in cautious amazement as it pushed itself upright, first wobbling on its injured leg, then daring to hobble a few steps at a time. It communicated constantly, not with words, but with soft chest rumbles, head tilts, and those deep, expressive eyes that seemed far too knowing. When Raymond spoke, it listened with an attentiveness he'd only ever seen in people. When he laughed under his breath at its awkward attempts to walk, the creature mimicked the sound, a rough, breathy little chuckle that startled him into silence. By the 3rd morning, it was following him around the cabin. When Raymond worked on a broken lantern, the creature sat beside him, watching every motion. Soon it began imitating his movements, trying to hold the screwdriver, tapping the metal frame, handing him nails and screws with surprising accuracy for such long, clumsy fingers. It seemed proud whenever he took something from its hand. "You smell like the whole forest, kid," Raymond muttered one afternoon, brushing pine needles from its fur. "Spruce, that's what I'll call you." The creature lifted its head at the sound of the scent name, letting out a pleasant, warbling hum as if accepting it. Spruce. The name settled over the cabin like something meant to be there. Raymond kept reminding himself this was temporary, dangerous. As soon as Spruce could walk properly, he'd have to return him somehow to the tribe searching the woods. But every time the creature curled up beside him, tugging at his sleeve with gentle trust, Raymond felt a protective instinct settling deeper into his chest. Something fatherly he hadn't felt in years. But even in these quiet moments, Spruce never fully relaxed. Every so often, he would stop whatever he was doing, ears lifting, eyes fixed on the window, listening, waiting. Raymond noticed it every time. The tribe was out there closer than ever, and Spruce could feel them long before Raymond ever would. Raymond was mending a split board on the porch when he heard tires crunching over gravel. His heart jumped. Visitors out here were rare and never good news. He rushed inside, motioning for Spruce to hide behind the wood stove. The creature obeyed instantly, crouching low, eyes wide with fear. A moment later, Ranger Tom Hargrove stepped out of his truck, hat pulled low, expression tight. "Morning, Ray," he called, scanning the tree line instead of him. Raymond forced a casual tone. "Something wrong?" Tom exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Got some reports from campers, strange noises. Trees marked up like I've never seen. Footprints too. Big ones. Thought I'd check on you." Raymond kept his face steady, though his pulse hammered. "Probably a bear." Tom shook his head. "No bear I've ever seen makes marks 8 feet off the ground." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Something big is moving through these woods. Stay inside for a few nights, all right?" Raymond nodded, hoping the ranger couldn't hear the soft, shaky breathing coming from inside the cabin. Tom turned to leave. As he reached his truck door, a tiny, anxious chirp slipped from Spruce's hiding place, just one note, but sharp enough to cut the morning air. Tom froze. Raymond coughed loudly, forcing a laugh. "Old cabin whistles through the boards. Drives me crazy." After a long pause, Tom nodded and drove off. Only when the engine faded did Spruce crawl out, trembling. Raymond shut the door quickly. The warning had been clear. People and things were watching. Sometime after midnight, Raymond jerked awake to a faint vibration in the floorboards. For a moment he lay still, listening, wondering if he'd dreamed it. Then it came again, stronger this time. A heavy, deliberate thud that made the lantern hanging on the wall sway gently. Footsteps, big ones, circling the cabin. Spruce bolted upright from his nest of blankets, eyes wide, body trembling uncontrollably. He scrambled across the bed and pressed himself against Raymond's chest, letting out a soft, broken whine. Raymond wrapped an arm around him, instinctively trying to steady the little creature, even as his own heart pounded. Then, another sound drifted through the trees, low, rhythmic calls, rising and falling in patterns. Not random, not animalistic. Coordinated, communicating, the tribe. Spruce answered with a tiny, involuntary chirp, then immediately buried his face into Raymond's shirt, as if realizing he shouldn't have made a sound. Raymond slid off the bed and quietly blew out the lantern. The cabin fell into darkness, the only light coming from the thin wash of moon filtering through the windows. He moved Spruce behind him, toward the far wall, just as a shadow filled the frame of the front window. Not just a shadow, a shape. Massive, broad-shouldered, towering. The silhouette eclipsed the moonlight completely. Raymond felt the air shift, heavy and electric, as the creature leaned closer to the glass. A long, rattling exhale fogged the pain from the outside. Then came the roar. Deep, thunderous, violent enough to shake dust loose from the rafters. Spruce clung to Raymond in terror, tiny hands gripping his shirt, whining softly but trying not to cry out. Raymond understood instantly. They weren't here to kill him, not yet. They were here for their missing young. But the way they circled the cabin, the way they inspected the walls, the deliberate footprints in the dirt, told him something else. They suspected someone had taken the baby. And if they believed that someone was him, this long night could easily be his last. Raymond took a deep breath, gripping Spruce tighter. Every instinct screamed at him to stay inside, to barricade the door, to run, but he knew there was no winning that way. The forest had him surrounded. The calls, the thudding steps, the low growls, they were waiting, watching, judging. He stepped out into the damp clearing, each footfall deliberate. Spruce clutched at his chest, small arms tightening around his neck, but didn't cry. Raymond raised one hand slowly, a silent plea, as the night air vibrated with the weight of movement all around them. A circle had formed 7 towering figures, each more massive than the last, muscles rippling beneath thick fur, faces hidden but eyes gleaming in the moonlight. They didn't advance, but the air was taut, a living wire of potential energy. Then the largest among them stepped forward, nearly 10 feet tall, broad-shouldered, its head craned slightly, letting out a low, resonant growl that shook Raymond's chest. This was the Alpha. Authority radiated from every movement. Every step was measured, deliberate. Raymond sank to one knee, setting Spruce gently on the ground. The baby wobbled for a heartbeat, then sprinted toward the tribe with remarkable speed. But then, in a shocking act of loyalty, it paused halfway and turned back. Spruce planted itself firmly between Raymond and the Alpha, chest rising, arms outstretched as if shielding him. For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The tribe froze. Heads tilted, the Alpha's eyes narrowing. The conflicting signals, the return of the baby, the human at its side confused them. The bond, the defiance, the protection, it was foreign, unexpected. Raymond remained still, heart hammering, realizing that in this instant, the life of a tiny creature and his own fate hinged on an act none of them could have anticipated. For a long moment, nothing moved. Raymond's chest rose and fell rapidly, Spruce trembling at his side, while the Alpha stared down at him with a weight that could crush mountains. Then, unexpectedly, the massive creature tilted its head back and let out a deep, resonating call. The sound vibrated through the clearing, low and rich, carrying a power that made the ground beneath Raymond's boots hum. One by one, the other 6 figures shifted, their massive shoulders lowered, their stances softened, not in submission, but in acknowledgement, a recognition of something they didn't fully understand: respect. From the edge of the circle, a figure emerged, the mother. Her steps were silent, yet every motion carried authority and grace. She stopped before Raymond, her large hand brushing gently against his forearm. The gesture was careful, deliberate, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Then, with a soft, rumbling hum, she lifted Spruce into her arms. The baby, however, didn't simply cling to its mother. Its tiny hands reached back toward Raymond, soft, emotional cries spilling from its throat. It wasn't fear. It was connection. Raymond felt his throat tighten. For the first time, he realized that in the eyes of these beings, he was no longer an intruder. He was a protector. The Alpha's eyes met his, one last time, and Raymond understood. The tribe had made their decision. He was not their enemy. The forest, for now, had acknowledged him. Spruce nestled in his mother's arms, but the bond between them and the man who saved him would not be forgotten. Just as the tension in the clearing began to ease, the Alpha stepped back, allowing the oldest member of the tribe to approach. Unlike the others, its fur was streaked white, long and matted with age, and its movements carried the deliberate weight of decades. Every step seemed measured, ceremonial, as if the forest itself had cleared a path for it. When the elder reached Raymond, it stopped, lowering its massive head slightly. From between its hands, it produced a bundle wrapped in leaves, moss, dried herbs, and small carved stones, each etched with primitive markings. With care, the creature dropped the bundle at Raymond's feet. Raymond bent down slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. He understood instantly. This was no mere collection of forest materials. It was an offering, a sign of gratitude, a gesture bridging two worlds that had never truly met before. The elder then placed a massive fist against its chest, holding it there for a long, silent heartbeat. Slowly, it extended the same fist toward Raymond, an unspoken, primitive salute. Raymond mirrored the motion, feeling an unearthly connection pulse between him and the creature. In that instant, he realized the forest had recognized him not as an intruder, but as a guardian. The gift wasn't just for him. It was a promise that the bond between human and tribe could exist, fragile but undeniable. The forest seemed to exhale as the tribe moved silently between the trees. One by one, the towering figures melted into the shadows, their massive frames disappearing into the dense undergrowth. Spruce, cradled now in his mother's arms, paused and looked back over her shoulder. His wide eyes met Raymond's for a brief, heartbeat-long instant, a mixture of trust, sadness, and something almost human in its understanding. Then came the call, a soft, trembling sound, unlike the deep, resonant tones of the Alpha or the rhythmic murmurs of the others. It was melodic, almost mournful, carrying through the night air. Raymond froze, chest tight. Somehow, instinctively, he knew what it meant. A warning, a farewell, a promise. The mother's eyes lingered on him for one last moment. Her soft hum carried the weight of the tribe's message. They would not harm him. They had judged him, and he had passed. The forest seemed to reclaim its silence once more, leaving Raymond alone beneath the pale moonlight, a guardian recognized but never part of their world. By morning, the woods were eerily calm. Ranger Tom Hargrove returned, trucks crunching over the gravel path, eyes scanning the tree line. Reports of earthquake-like ground movements had drawn him back, and he looked expectantly at Raymond. Raymond offered a casual shrug. Heard nothing. Must have been the wind. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. Tom studied him for a moment, doubt flickering in his eyes, but he didn't push. With a grunt, he turned and walked back to his truck. Raymond watched the dust settle behind the vehicle. The forest seemed unchanged, peaceful, silent, but he knew better. The tribe was still out there, moving through the shadows, watching, remembering, and somewhere, Spruce and the others were alive, safe, but forever a part of a world he would never fully enter. A shiver ran down his spine. He had crossed a line few humans ever dared, and the forest had acknowledged him.